"Don't touch me," whispered the Apache warrior, but he only covered her wounded feet. The sun had just begun to rise over the jagged cliffs of the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara adjusted the strap of her small backpack, her legs heavy and sore from hours of walking over rough terrain. She had been separated from her travel group the previous evening, when a sudden band of thieves had forced everyone to scatter. Her mind replayed the fear and confusion she had felt, and she shivered slightly, not just from the cool morning air, but from the memory of that night. She had no weapon, no companion, only the worn boots on her feet and the courage she forced herself to summon. Each step was painful. Her feet, rubbed raw by the unforgiving rocks and sand, left red marks on her skin. Blood had started to soak through her socks, making each movement a sharp reminder of her vulnerability. Clara gritted her teeth and pressed on. The desert was quiet, almost eerily so, except for the distant cries of birds and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. She knew she had to keep moving, or risk being caught by the same thieves, or worse. As she rounded a narrow canyon, her eyes caught a figure standing on a ridge, partially hidden in the shadows. He was tall, with dark, penetrating eyes and long hair that flowed behind him like the desert wind. His presence was calm but commanding, and every instinct inside her screamed both warning and curiosity. Clara froze. She didn't know if he was friend or foe. The figure descended slowly, his steps deliberate and quiet. In his hand he carried nothing but a piece of cloth, folded carefully. There was no sign of a weapon, no sign of aggression, but Clara's heart raced anyway. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely audible as her body instinctively backed away. He did not answer with words. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning her injuries, the raw red marks on her feet, the swelling that had started to form. Clara felt a mix of fear and disbelief. How could a stranger, someone she did not know, show concern without threatening her? Clara tried to retreat further, but the rocky terrain made her stumble. Pain shot through her ankles and she winced, pressing her hands to the ground. The man's eyes softened, and he took a small step forward. Clara instinctively pulled back, whispering, "Don't touch me." He stopped immediately. There was no force, no insistence, only a quiet understanding in his gaze. Then, with deliberate care, he knelt down and placed the cloth gently over her feet, covering them without making contact. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment Clara felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. She didn't know this man, yet he seemed to understand her pain without needing words. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Clara's breathing began to slow as she took in the scene. The man sitting quietly, the sun warming the rocks, the wind carrying the scent of desert sage. She wanted to ask questions, to demand explanations, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she watched him carefully, noticing the small movements he made, adjusting the cloth over her feet to shield them from the harsh sun, tilting his head as if listening to the desert itself, and glancing around as though to ensure no danger approached. Time passed slowly, but Clara gradually felt the sharp edge of fear dull slightly. She realized she had been holding her breath. The desert, once threatening and vast, now seemed almost peaceful in the company of this silent guardian. Her curiosity grew. Who was he? Why was he helping her? And how could someone show such care without saying a single word? Her mind wandered to the stories she had heard about the people who lived in the desert long before her time. Stories of warriors and protectors who knew the land better than anyone, who moved silently like shadows, and who understood pain and survival in ways others could not. Could this man be one of them? The thought was both frightening and strangely comforting. She finally dared to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" The man's gaze met hers. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he gestured toward the trail ahead, indicating that she should continue moving, and then returned his attention to the cloth covering her feet. Clara realized that this was his way of communicating. He would help her, but only in ways that respected her space, her fear, and her autonomy. Despite the pain, she managed to sit up straighter. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if he could understand her. He inclined his head slightly, the closest thing to a nod she could interpret as acknowledgement. She felt a flicker of trust, cautious but real. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to hope. The sun climbed higher and the desert began to heat up. Clara knew she couldn't stay in one place for long. She gingerly tested her feet, wincing as pain radiated through her ankles. The man rose slowly, his movements fluid and deliberate. He gestured again toward the path ahead, silently offering to accompany her. Clara hesitated, unsure if she could trust him to walk beside her, but the alternative, moving alone with bleeding, raw feet, was far worse. She nodded reluctantly, and he fell in step behind her, careful not to touch her but close enough to provide protection. As they walked, Clara observed him more closely. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, alert to every sound and movement. He moved with a quiet grace, almost blending into the desert landscape. She realized that he must know this land intimately, that he could survive here in ways she could not even imagine. She marveled at his strength and patience, even as she struggled with her own limitations. Hours passed, the sun rising to its peak. Clara's body screamed for rest, but she pressed on, guided by the silent presence of the warrior. Occasionally, he would stop to gesture toward water hidden in small crevices or shade provided by the rocks. She followed his guidance, grateful for the small comforts he offered without ever touching her. Each act, though simple, felt monumental. As the day wore on, Clara's fear gradually transformed into cautious trust. She realized that the desert, with all its harshness, could be navigated safely with someone who understood it completely. And this man, this silent guardian, seemed determined to help her survive without demanding anything in return. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to believe that she might make it out alive. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau overlooking a vast stretch of desert. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the sand and rocks. Clara sank to the ground, exhausted. Her feet throbbed violently, but she felt a strange sense of security in the presence of the warrior. He knelt again, adjusting the cloth over her feet to ensure they were protected from the cooling wind. Clara looked at him and whispered, I don't know how to thank you." He didn't answer, only tilted his head slightly, as if to say that words were unnecessary. Clara realized that his care was its own form of communication, deeper and more meaningful than anything she could express. In that moment, she understood something vital. Trust and compassion could appear in the most unexpected forms, often without words, and that sometimes survival depended not only on physical strength, but on the quiet courage of those who cared enough to help. As the shadows grew longer and the desert night approached, Clara allowed herself to rest, knowing that she was not alone. And for the first time in days, she felt the fragile, comforting warmth of hope. The desert night settled over the plateau, bringing a sharp chill that made Clara shiver. The warmth of the day had vanished, leaving only the cold bite of the desert wind. She hugged herself tightly, trying to ward off the creeping numbness in her limbs. Her feet still throbbed painfully beneath the cloth the Apache warrior had placed over them, and she realized that without his silent care, she might have been forced to crawl through the rocks, risking infection or worse. The warrior did not speak. He simply adjusted the cloth again, ensuring her feet were shielded from the rough ground. He then moved a few steps away to gather small stones and branches, creating a makeshift shelter that would protect them from the wind. Clara watched him carefully, studying the way he worked with ease, almost as if the desert itself was a part of him. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, and purposeful. She felt a mix of awe and fear. There was power in his presence, but it was quiet, restrained, never threatening. Hours passed as the night deepened. Clara tried to rest, but sleep was elusive. The pain in her feet pulsed like a constant drumbeat, and memories of the bandits haunted her mind. She kept glancing at the warrior, wondering why he stayed, why he helped her without question. Every instinct she had told her to run, to get as far away as possible from any stranger. But another part of her, a smaller, quieter part, told her that she could not survive this night alone. At one point, Clara noticed movement in the distance, a pack of coyotes moving silently along the edge of the canyon. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, unsure if she should call out or stay still. The warrior, who had been quietly observing the horizon, motioned for her to stay calm. With fluid, precise movements, he gathered some small rocks and threw them in the opposite direction, drawing the animals away. They hesitated, then followed the sound, disappearing into the darkness. Clara exhaled slowly, the tension in her body easing for the first time since sundown. The small acts of protection began to chip away at her fear. She realized that he was not here to harm her, he was here to help her survive. Even so, the instinct to be cautious lingered. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence of the night. He looked at her, his eyes deep and unreadable, and simply shook his head slightly. No words, no explanation, just a look that seemed to say, actions speak louder than words. Clara understood that he would not force trust, but he would provide safety as long as she allowed it. As the night wore on, Clara's body began to ache from sitting in one position for so long. The warrior noticed and gently indicated that she should try to rest. She hesitated. Every muscle in her body protested, but she knew she needed to regain strength if she hoped to continue her journey at dawn. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, trying to ignore the pain in her feet and ankles. The soft rustle of the wind over the rocks, combined with the quiet presence of the warrior nearby, offered a strange sense of comfort. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her fear, and she drifted into a light sleep. In her dreams, she found herself walking through the desert with the warrior, the landscape shifting between reality and imagination. She saw herself running freely, no longer burdened by pain or fear, with him always just a few steps behind, guiding and protecting her. Even in her dreams, she never felt threatened. The warrior's presence was like a silent shield, steady and unwavering. Morning came slowly, painting the sky with pale shades of pink and orange. Clara awoke to the cold desert air and the soft warmth of the first sun rays. She immediately felt the throbbing pain in her feet, a harsh reminder of the reality she faced. The warrior was already awake, moving quietly to gather water from a nearby crevice. He had prepared a small supply for her, leaving it within reach. Clara's stomach tightened as she realized the extent of his care. Every detail mattered to him, even if he never said a word. She sipped the water cautiously, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat and easing some of the tension in her body. The warrior watched her, his gaze calm and unwavering. There was no rush, no pressure, only patient attention. Clara realized that she had never met anyone like him, someone who could offer help without demanding anything in return. The thought brought a lump to her throat. She wanted to speak, to express her gratitude, but words felt inadequate for the depth of her feelings. After she had rested and eaten a small portion of dried food the warrior had prepared, he gestured toward the path ahead. Clara looked down at her feet, raw and swollen, and felt a surge of anxiety. Could she really continue walking? The warrior noticed her hesitation. Without touching her, he began moving slowly, stopping occasionally to demonstrate how she could step carefully to avoid further injury. Clara followed, grateful for his guidance. Each step was painful, but she began to feel a small sense of accomplishment. She was moving forward and she was not alone. The journey was slow and grueling. Rocks and sand threatened to twist her ankles with every step. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them mercilessly. Clara felt sweat soak her clothes and her muscles screamed for rest. Yet the warrior remained patient, never rushing her, always watching, always guiding. He pointed out shaded areas, showed her the safest paths, and occasionally provided small gestures of reassurance. A nod, a subtle glance, a slight tilt of his head. Each gesture was quiet, but it spoke volumes. By midday, the pain in her feet had grown almost unbearable. Clara stumbled and almost fell. The warrior was immediately by her side, moving swiftly but carefully, adjusting the cloth over her feet again. He did not scold, did not rush. He simply ensured she could continue. Clara's fear of strangers, of danger, began to blend with a growing sense of trust. She realized that survival depended not only on her strength, but on the quiet presence of someone who cared deeply and acted without expectation. As they moved through the desert, Clara began to ask questions, using gestures and broken sentences. "Who are you?" she asked hesitantly. He did not answer directly, but he pointed toward the horizon and then toward himself, indicating a connection with the land and the people who had lived here long before. Clara understood enough to see that he was not just a stranger. He was a guardian of this place, someone whose life was deeply intertwined with the desert itself. By late afternoon, they reached a small, shallow canyon that provided some protection from the sun. The warrior indicated that they should rest again. Clara sank to the ground, tears stinging her eyes from pain and exhaustion. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. The warrior did not speak or offer comfort in words, but his presence alone felt enough. He adjusted the cloth over her feet once more and settled a short distance away, keeping watch over her as she rested. Clara realized that sometimes care and protection did not need words. They were felt, seen, and understood through actions alone. Night fell again, colder than before. Clara struggled to stay warm, wrapping herself in a small blanket. The warrior had gathered more stones and branches to create a windbreak, shielding her from the chill. As she watched him move silently through the shadows, she felt a strange sense of security. She could not explain why, but she trusted him. Even in her vulnerability, even in her pain, she trusted that he would not let harm come to her. They stayed like that for hours, the night quiet except for the occasional distant howl of a coyote or the rustle of desert brush. Clara found herself opening her heart slowly, feeling a connection to this silent, stoic figure who had entered her life so abruptly and changed it so profoundly. She realized that fear could coexist with trust, that pain could coexist with hope, and that sometimes the quietest people left the deepest impact on one's life. By the end of the night, Clara's trust had grown. She still felt pain and fear, but now she also felt hope. She understood, in a way she could not yet explain, that survival was not just about physical endurance. It was about connection, about understanding, and about allowing someone else's care to guide you through the darkest moments. The Apache warrior had become her guide, her protector, and in a way she could not yet name, her companion through a wilderness that had once seemed utterly unforgiving. The sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, casting a soft golden light across the jagged rocks and sand. Dunes. Clara awoke to the quiet hum of the morning breeze. Her body ached from the journey, and her feet throbbed painfully beneath the cloth the Apache warrior had placed over them. Yet, despite the pain, there was a strange sense of calm in the air. She realized that the warrior had been there through the night, watching over her without a word, without a demand. His presence alone made the world feel safer. After taking a few cautious sips of water from the small supply he had gathered, Clara tried to stretch her legs. She winced at every movement, but the warrior did not rush her. He simply gestured toward the path ahead, indicating that it was time to continue. She nodded and rose slowly, leaning heavily on a makeshift walking stick she had fashioned from a branch. With each step, she felt the sharp pain of her feet, but she also felt a growing determination. She had survived the night, and with him by her side, she felt the possibility of reaching safety. As they walked, Clara began to notice the subtle details of the desert that the warrior seemed to know instinctively. He moved with confidence over the uneven terrain, stepping lightly where the ground was treacherous and pausing to point out hidden dangers. At one point, he indicated a narrow ledge above a steep drop and guided her hand with a small, careful gesture. Clara followed, trusting his knowledge even as her heart pounded with fear. The desert could be merciless, but with him, it seemed manageable. Hours passed, and the heat of the midday sun bore down on them. Clara's energy waned, but the warrior remained steadfast, pacing himself to match her slow steps. He pointed out small patches of shade where she could rest, occasionally offering water without touching her. Each gesture reminded Clara of his quiet patience and understanding. She began to wonder about him, about the life he led in these harsh lands, and about how he had come to know the desert so intimately. Curiosity overcame her caution. She tried to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "Where do you live?" The warrior looked at her for a long moment. Instead of answering in words, he pointed toward the distant mountains and then toward himself, indicating a deep connection to the land. Clara understood enough to see that he was not just a wanderer, he belonged to this place. His knowledge, his skills, his very presence seemed rooted in the desert itself. The silence between them was comfortable now. Clara no longer felt the sharp edge of fear as she had when she first saw him. Instead, she felt a sense of trust growing, fragile but real. She noticed small things about him. The way he adjusted the cloth over her feet without making contact, the careful way he navigated dangerous terrain, the occasional glance at the horizon as if listening to the whispers of the desert. Each detail spoke volumes about his character, and Clara felt a quiet admiration. By late afternoon, they reached a small oasis tucked between rocky hills. A shallow pool of water reflected the sky, and a few trees provided welcome shade. The warrior gestured for her to rest while he moved slightly away, scouting the area. Clara sank to the ground, relief washing over her as she dipped her hands into the cool water. The cloth over her feet was dampened slightly to ease the pain, and she felt a small measure of comfort she had not experienced in days. As she rested, Clara began to notice other signs of life: birds chirping in the trees, small animals darting across the sand, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. She realized that the desert, though harsh, was alive, full of hidden beauty and resilience. She thought about her own struggle to survive, and she saw a parallel in the quiet strength of the warrior beside her. He was part of this world in a way she could not yet fully comprehend, and she felt both humbled and inspired by his presence. The warrior returned after a short time, carrying a few edible plants and small roots he had found nearby. He placed them within reach, gesturing for Clara to eat. She hesitated at first, unfamiliar with the food, but hunger overcame caution. She sampled a small piece, and the mild, earthy flavor reminded her of simpler times, of meals shared with family before the journey turned perilous. The warrior watched silently, his eyes steady and patient, ensuring she was safe and nourished. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Clara noticed the sun begin its descent, casting long shadows across the desert. The temperature dropped slightly, and she shivered again. The warrior had anticipated this, gathering more stones and creating a small windbreak around the resting area. He gestured for her to lie down and rest her feet. She complied, grateful for the care he showed without a single spoken word. Each act, no matter how small, deepened her sense of trust. During this pause, Clara allowed herself to reflect on the journey so far. She remembered the terror of being alone after the bandit attack, the sharp pain of her wounds, and the overwhelming uncertainty of survival. And yet, in the midst of it all, the warrior had appeared, silent, steady, protective. She realized that his presence had transformed her experience of the desert from one of fear to one of cautious hope. She felt a deep sense of gratitude that words could not fully capture. As twilight approached, Clara noticed the first stars appearing in the sky. The warrior remained alert, scanning the horizon while she rested. She watched him for a long time, observing the subtle ways he communicated with the environment, the tilt of his head, the careful placement of his hands, the precise movements of his feet. She began to understand that his survival depended not only on his physical skills, but on his deep understanding of the land and its rhythms. She felt privileged to witness such quiet mastery. Night fell completely, and the temperature dropped sharply. Clara wrapped herself in her small blanket, trying to preserve warmth. The warrior remained nearby, kneeling silently, adjusting the cloth over her feet to ensure protection from the cold desert rocks. She felt a strange comfort in his presence, a reassurance that she had not known for days. Sleep came more easily that night, lighter but more peaceful, as the constant fear that had plagued her now seemed to have lessened. In her dreams, Clara walked alongside the warrior through the desert. The landscape shifted and changed, sometimes vast and open, sometimes narrow and rocky, yet the warrior's presence was constant. He guided her carefully, ensuring she avoided danger, always patient, always protective. Even in her dreams, she felt no fear, only a growing sense of trust and connection. The next morning, Clara awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the sparse trees. Her feet were still sore, but the discomfort felt more manageable than before. She looked to the warrior, who was already awake, moving quietly to gather water and check the surrounding terrain. He had prepared for her needs before she could even ask, demonstrating once again his thoughtful care. Clara felt a profound respect for him, mixed with gratitude and admiration. They set out again, moving slowly along a winding path that led through the hills. Clara followed his guidance carefully, trusting his instincts and knowledge of the land. She began to notice the subtle ways he communicated without words, the slight tilt of his head to indicate danger, the gentle gesture to point toward a safe path, the quiet assurance in his steady gaze. She realized that these unspoken lessons were teaching her not just about survival, but about patience, observation, and respect for the natural world. By midday, they reached a small canyon that offered some shade. Clara rested while the warrior scouted ahead, returning after a short while with a small bundle of edible plants. She ate slowly, savoring the simple nourishment and feeling a growing sense of strength return to her body. Each act of care, no matter how small, reminded her that she was not alone, and that survival was possible even in the harshest conditions. As the afternoon sun began to descend, Clara noticed a shift in her emotions. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by trust, by admiration, and by a quiet bond that had formed between her and the warrior. She realized that survival was not only about physical endurance, it was about connection, understanding, and the willingness to accept help when offered. And in the silence of the desert, she had found both guidance and companionship. That night, as the desert grew cold and quiet, Clara wrapped herself in her blanket and settled down near the warrior. He adjusted the cloth over her feet one final time before sitting nearby, vigilant and patient. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope. She had survived 2 nights in the desert, guided by the steady presence of someone who cared without words. And she knew in the core of her being that the bond they had formed, silent, fragile, and profound, would carry her through the challenges yet to come. The desert morning arrived with a soft glow, illuminating the jagged cliffs and distant sand dunes. Clara awoke slowly, her body stiff and sore from the long journey, but there was a small spark of hope in her heart. Her feet were still tender and swollen, but the cloth the Apache warrior had placed over them offered some protection from the rough ground. She moved carefully, feeling the pain but also realizing that each step brought her closer to safety. The warrior was already awake, standing a few feet away, scanning the horizon with calm, sharp eyes. Clara watched him for a moment, marveling at his quiet attentiveness. He had been her silent guardian for days, guiding her, protecting her, and ensuring her survival without ever demanding anything in return. She felt a mixture of gratitude, awe, and a growing trust she could no longer ignore. After a brief drink of water, Clara rose slowly and followed the warrior as he led her along a narrow canyon. The path was tricky, with loose rocks and sharp edges, but he moved with a natural confidence that made it easier for her to navigate. He paused occasionally to indicate the safest steps, gesturing gently toward the ground. Clara followed his guidance carefully, appreciating how he respected her space, never touching her without permission, yet always making sure she was safe. As they continued, Clara's curiosity about him grew stronger. She wanted to understand more about the man who had appeared in her life so suddenly and had become her protector. She tried to speak, her voice tentative. "Do you live here?" The warrior glanced at her, then toward the distant hills and nodded slightly. He pointed to himself and then to the land, communicating that his life was deeply connected to this harsh desert. Clara began to realize that his skills, knowledge, and calm presence were the result of a lifetime spent surviving and thriving in this environment. The journey was long and exhausting. The sun climbed higher, burning down with relentless heat, and Clara struggled to keep her energy up. Each step was a test of endurance, her feet throbbing with every movement. Yet, despite the difficulty, she began to notice small details she had missed before. The way the wind shifted across the rocks, the patterns of shadow and light that marked the safest paths, the subtle signs of animals hidden among the brush. The warrior moved as if he had memorized every curve of the land, every hidden danger, and every source of water. At one point, Clara stumbled on a loose rock and nearly fell. The warrior was immediately by her side, moving swiftly but carefully. He adjusted the cloth over her feet, ensuring it stayed in place and provided protection. He did not scold or speak harshly. His actions were gentle, patient, and precise. Clara felt a wave of gratitude mixed with something deeper, an unspoken understanding that he would not let her be harmed as long as he was there. By midday, they reached a small outcrop that provided some shade. Clara sank to the ground, exhausted, and drank water from the small supply the warrior had brought. He remained alert, his eyes scanning the horizon while she rested. The quiet presence of someone so watchful and careful allowed her to breathe more easily than she had in days. She realized that survival was not just about physical strength. It was about trust, observation, and having someone who cared enough to guide you without forcing you. As the afternoon wore on, Clara began to ask more questions, using gestures and simple words. She wanted to know about him, about the desert, and about the life he had lived. The warrior did not answer directly with words, but he showed her ways to identify edible plants, find water, and navigate the tricky terrain. He demonstrated these skills slowly and patiently, ensuring she could follow along without causing further injury to her feet. Clara watched intently, learning from his actions and slowly gaining confidence in her own ability to survive. The desert sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara felt a mixture of relief and anxiety, relief that the day's journey was almost over, anxiety because the night in the desert could be harsh and unforgiving. The warrior, sensing her unease, moved ahead to find a suitable place to rest. He returned after a short while, gesturing for her to follow him to a sheltered area between rocks where they could spend the night. Once settled, the warrior adjusted the cloth over Clara's feet again and gathered small branches and stones to create a windbreak. Clara wrapped herself in her blanket, feeling the sharp chill of the desert evening. Despite the cold, she felt a strange comfort in the warrior's presence. His actions, quiet and deliberate, spoke louder than words ever could. She realized that she trusted him completely, even though she had known him for only a few days. That night, Clara reflected on the journey so far. She remembered the fear and pain of being alone, the terror of the bandit attack, and the uncertainty of surviving in the desert. And yet, through it all, the warrior had been there, patient, steady, and protective. His guidance had turned a seemingly impossible journey into a manageable one. She understood that true courage was often quiet and unassuming, found in those who acted with care and patience rather than force. Sleep came more easily than before. Clara rested, her body finally able to recover from the relentless strain of travel. In her dreams, she walked alongside the warrior through the desert, the landscape shifting between harsh dunes and hidden oases. He guided her carefully, ensuring she avoided danger at every turn. Even in her dreams, she felt no fear, only trust and a growing sense of connection. The next morning, Clara awoke to a soft pink sky. Her feet were still sore, but the discomfort felt less overwhelming than the previous days. She looked at the warrior, already awake and scanning the surrounding area. He had prepared water and a small amount of food for her, and she realized that he had anticipated her needs before she even expressed them. Clara felt a deep respect for him, understanding that his care and attention were born from experience, patience, and a profound understanding of the desert. As they continued their journey, the bond between them grew stronger. Clara relied on the warrior not only for physical guidance but also for emotional reassurance. She noticed how he observed the desert carefully, reading signs she would have missed, tracks of animals, shifts in the wind, the location of water sources. Each gesture, each small action, taught her not only about survival, but also about patience, observation, and respect for the natural world. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon that provided some shade and temporary relief from the sun. Clara rested while the warrior scouted ahead, returning after a short while with small edible roots and plants. She ate slowly, appreciating the nourishment and feeling a renewed sense of strength. The warrior's silent patience and steady presence reminded her that survival was possible even in the harshest conditions, as long as one respected the land and followed careful guidance. As the afternoon wore on, Clara began to reflect on the emotional journey she had undergone. Fear had been replaced with trust, pain had been softened by care, and uncertainty had been transformed into hope. She realized that the warrior's actions had shown her a deeper truth, that survival was not just about physical strength, but also about connection, understanding, and the quiet courage of those who cared enough to help. Night fell again, and the desert grew cold. Clara wrapped herself tightly in her blanket, feeling the wind bite through the rocky crevices. The warrior adjusted the cloth over her feet once more, ensuring they were protected from the cold and rough ground. She watched him for a long time, appreciating the steady, calm way he moved. His presence was a silent promise of safety, and she felt an unspoken bond forming, one built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. As she drifted to sleep that night, Clara understood that the journey had changed her. She was no longer just a lost traveler in a harsh desert. She was someone who had learned to trust, to observe, and to rely on the quiet courage of another human being. The warrior had become more than a guide. He was a protector, a teacher, and a companion through the trials of the desert. She felt gratitude beyond words, knowing that his presence had given her the strength to survive and continue her journey toward safety. The desert morning arrived, soft and quiet, with the pale light of dawn stretching across the sand dunes and jagged cliffs. Clara awoke slowly, her body sore but her spirit stronger than it had been in days. Her feet still throbbed beneath the protective cloth the Apache warrior had placed over them, but each step now felt slightly more manageable. She stretched carefully, grateful for the night's rest, and looked at the warrior. He was already awake, standing a short distance away, scanning the horizon as he had done every morning. His eyes, calm and watchful, gave her a sense of reassurance she had never experienced before. After drinking water and eating a small amount of food he had prepared, Clara rose and followed him along the narrow desert path. The terrain was unforgiving. Rocks and uneven sand threatened to twist her feet at every step, but the warrior moved with the ease of someone who knew the land intimately. He paused frequently to indicate safe footing, guiding her without ever touching her without permission. Clara felt gratitude mingled with awe. She was witnessing a level of patience, skill, and respect for life that she had never encountered before. Hours passed, and the desert sun climbed higher, beating down relentlessly. Clara's muscles ached, her feet throbbed, and yet she pressed forward, driven by both fear and hope. The warrior's presence was a steady anchor. He never rushed her, never pressured her, but he always made sure she remained safe. His small gestures, pointing out shade, directing her around loose rocks, ensuring the cloth over her feet stayed secure, taught her more about survival than any words could. By midday, Clara began to feel a deeper connection to him, a bond that went beyond gratitude. She realized that he had become more than just a protector. He was a guide, a teacher, and someone whose presence had transformed her fear into resilience. She had learned to observe the desert as he did, noticing signs in the wind, the movements of animals, and the subtle shifts in the landscape. With each lesson, her confidence grew, and the pain in her feet became a challenge she could endure rather than a limit she feared. They stopped briefly at a small canyon that offered shade from the blazing sun. Clara rested while the warrior moved a short distance away to inspect the surrounding area. He returned with a small amount of water and some edible roots he had found, leaving them within her reach. Clara ate slowly, savoring the nourishment, and felt her strength returning. She watched him, silent and steady, and a thought occurred to her. He had not only protected her from the dangers of the desert, but he had also shown her how to survive on her own, how to read the land, and how to trust her instincts. As they continued, Clara began to speak more often, her words tentative but curious. She asked about his life, his knowledge of the desert, and the people he had known. The warrior did not answer in full sentences but used gestures, expressions, and actions to communicate. He demonstrated how to find water in hidden places, how to identify safe paths, and how to use the terrain for shelter. Clara realized that his silence was not emptiness. It was a language of its own, one built on observation, respect, and careful attention. By late afternoon, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the desert. Clara's pace slowed as her fatigue grew, but the warrior adjusted his guidance to match her needs. He pointed out shade, suggested rest stops, and ensured her feet were protected at every step. Despite the hardship, Clara felt a growing sense of confidence. She was no longer just a traveler struggling to survive. She was learning to navigate, endure, and trust. She had discovered strength she had not known she possessed, guided quietly by the warrior's steady hand and unspoken lessons. As evening approached, they reached a small plateau that overlooked a wide valley below. A settlement lay in the distance, the first signs of human life Clara had seen since the journey began. Relief washed over her. She had survived the desert with the guidance of someone who had appeared out of nowhere, and now safety was within reach. Her heart pounded with anticipation and gratitude, mixed with a bittersweet sadness at the thought of parting from the warrior who had become her companion, protector, and guide. The warrior gestured for her to rest while he scouted the area ahead. Clara watched him move with fluid precision, blending into the landscape, always aware, always protective. He returned after a short while, signaling that it was safe to proceed. Clara carefully followed, each step guided by the lessons he had silently taught her. When they reached the edge of the settlement, she saw people moving about, tending to daily tasks, and the sight filled her with hope. She could finally receive care for her wounded feet, and she would no longer be alone in the harsh desert. Before she could move further, the warrior knelt beside her, adjusting the cloth over her feet one last time. Clara looked into his eyes, searching for words that could convey her gratitude, admiration, and respect. She realized that no words could truly capture the depth of what she felt. He had guided her through danger, pain, and fear with quiet strength, patience, and unwavering care. She nodded slowly, her heart full of unspoken thanks. The warrior inclined his head in acknowledgement, a silent understanding passing between them. Clara took her first steps into the settlement, feeling both relief and a lingering sadness. She was leaving the desert, leaving behind the harsh landscape that had tested her endurance, and the warrior who had become an unexpected guardian. Yet she carried with her a profound sense of growth, courage, and trust that she knew would remain with her forever. She understood now that survival was not only about physical endurance, but also about connection, empathy, and the quiet courage of those who offered guidance without expectation. The warrior remained at the edge of the settlement, watching as she received help for her feet from the town's healers. He did not approach, did not interfere. His work was complete. Clara noticed him one last time, silhouetted against the fading light of the desert, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She realized that some bonds were unspoken, some acts of courage silent, but their impact could be life-changing. He had given her the gift of survival, not just through protection, but through teaching, patience, and respect. Days passed and Clara recovered. She often thought of the warrior and the lessons he had imparted. She remembered the pain, the fear, the quiet moments of care, and the strength she had found within herself. The desert had been unforgiving, but it had also been a place of transformation. She knew that she would carry these lessons forward, that the memory of the warrior's presence would continue to guide her in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. One evening, as the sun set over the settlement, Clara stood at the edge of the town, looking toward the distant desert. She whispered a quiet thank you into the wind, knowing that somewhere, the warrior continued to walk the land he knew so well, protecting, guiding, and surviving as he always had. She smiled, feeling both sadness and joy, sadness at parting, but joy in having witnessed and received such quiet courage. The desert had tested her, shaped her, and revealed the strength she never knew she had, all through the presence of one silent, steadfast guardian. Clara understood that true courage and kindness were often quiet, unassuming, and unseen. They were found in actions rather than words, in gestures of care rather than declarations. The warrior had shown her that, and in doing so, he had changed her life forever. She would never forget the man who had appeared in the desert when she was alone, injured, and afraid, and had guided her not just to safety, but to a deeper understanding of trust, patience, and human connection. As night fell over the settlement, and the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been difficult, even painful, but it had brought her to safety and given her lessons that would remain with her for the rest of her life. She had survived, guided by the quiet, unwavering strength of the Apache warrior, and she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she carried within her the courage and resilience born from this extraordinary encounter. In the silence of the desert night, Clara whispered again, "Thank you," knowing that somewhere beyond the mountains and valleys, the warrior continued his path. She smiled through tears, feeling the warmth of gratitude and the quiet joy of survival. The desert had tested her in every way, but it had also revealed the depth of human kindness and courage, embodied in the silent guardian who had walked beside her through pain, fear, and uncertainty. And with that, Clara turned back toward the settlement, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life, carrying the lessons of the desert, and the memory of the warrior who had taught her the meaning of true strength forever in her heart.